Okay, join me on page 172 in your social studies textbook. If you don't have it out now, pause the video, go ahead and get it out and open to page 172, and then join me to follow along. Chapter 5, Lesson 1. Let's go. The land called Nubia. You are there. The year is 2000 BC, and you live in the land of Nubia, south of Egypt. Your father is a Nubian trader, and your mother makes woven cloth. Today, an Egyptian has come to trade with your father. Boasting about the glory of Egypt, the Egyptian describes amazing buildings, statues, clothing, foods, and decorations. Only when the Egyptian leaves does your father speak out. He says bitterly, "The stone for his fine buildings comes from Nubia, and so does the gold for Egyptian statues. And where do the leopard skins, ostrich eggs, feathers, ivory, and ebony and spices they use come from? Nubia, of course." So he seems a little frustrated, all the bragging that the man did. He's saying, yeah, well, Egypt, you get all of that stuff from us. We trade it to you guys. Okay, moving over to page 173, follow along. Cataracts pose dangers, and we remember, and if you look up at your screen real quick, that's a picture of a cataract. At 6 places along the Nile's winding course, stone cliffs and boulders force its waters through narrow channels. The rushing water forms waterfalls and rapids called cataracts. The first cataract marked the southern boundary of ancient Egypt. So you can see these cataracts would make it difficult to travel along the Nile where you run into a cataract like this, okay? You're not going to want to take any kind of boat trying to go up that, obviously, and you wouldn't want to take your boat down it either. Okay, continuing in your text, page 173, let's start at the top. The ancient land known as Nubia stretched along the Nile River from the southern border of Egypt to the city of Khartoum in Sudan. It was in ancient Nubia that in about 2000 BC, the Kush civilization began to develop. Because Egypt and Nubia were neighboring lands, the people of each place adopted some of the ideas and customs of the other. Over time, the two came to have political, cultural, and commercial relationships. Something that is commercial relates to large-scale buying and selling. So when it says commercial relations, it means they traded with each other, is essentially what it means. They bought and sold things from each other. Okay, continuing in your text. The geography of the two lands could not have been more different. In the land once known as Nubia, high cliffs rise straight up along the banks of the Nile. In contrast, wide plains lie on both sides of the river as it flows north through Egypt. So in Nubia, you didn't have that nice land next to the river that you could do really good farming with, because the Nile, next to the Nile, is cliffs, not fertile lands. Okay, continuing in your text. As the Nile travels through what was Nubia, its course is not as smooth as it is downstream in Egypt. In the south, large granite boulders block portions of the river, causing rapids and waterfalls. These groups of rocks form the 6 large areas of cataracts found along the southern or upper part of the Nile. The cataracts made travel on the upper Nile difficult. To travel the cataracts, sailors waited for high waters or pulled their boats over and around them. Egypt and what was Nubia do have one important feature in common. The intense heat of the sun dries out both regions. Rain almost never falls, so the Nile is the main source of water. Like the Egyptians, most Nubians lived alongside the Nile. So they lived as close as they could to the Nile, but obviously it wasn't as smooth land because it was kind of more rocky in Nubia along the Nile with cliffs and things. Okay, turning the page, 174. A wealth of resources. So let's find out what are some of the things that Nubia had. Long before the Kush civilization formed, the Nubians had established agricultural communities in the region. This had occurred at the same time that the Egyptian civilization was beginning to develop in about 3500 BC. While most Egyptians of the time worked as farmers, many Nubians chose to be cattle herders. In fact, cattle owners were often the richest and most powerful people in all of Nubia. These herders were pastoral nomads who moved their herds from place to place with the seasons. Only a small number of Nubians were farmers who stayed on the same land year after year. So again, that's because in Nubia, further up along the Nile, there wasn't as much fertile land to do the farming. Okay, continuing in your text. Within Nubia's rocky land were many resources, including copper and gold. In some areas, cliffs of granite and other kinds of rocks useful for construction rose high above the land. The Nubians realized that their land held valuable raw materials, or natural resources that can be formed into useful products. Raw materials such as gold could be turned into beautiful jewelry, while iron could be crafted into tools as well as weapons. Like the Egyptians and other peoples, the Nubians used clay to craft pottery. This product was especially valuable to settled peoples such as the Nubian farmers. Nubian pottery could be used to store grain, to hold water, to cook in, and to keep supplies. In contrast, Nubian cattle herders rarely used pottery because it could get broken on their long trips. The cattle herders were constantly moving from place to place. Continuing in the text, the Nubians made pottery as early as 600 BC. Eventually, their pottery became of fine quality, and the Nubians began to offer their pottery as valued trade items. Okay, let's look at a closer look, the little purple box in your text, life in a Kushite city. Ancient Kushite cities were busy places. They served not only as centers of trade, but also as manufacturing centers. Number 1, center of trade. Traders from both northern and southern Africa traveled to Kushite cities to exchange goods. 2, manufacturing center. Kushite cities became well known for products produced there. These included iron tools, woven cloth, and pottery containers. Number 3, thriving city. Thousands of people lived and worked in Kushite cities. Many others visited the cities to buy products made there. Okay, turning the page, going on to page 175, Nubian trade. So let's learn now about the trade that Nubia had with the people around them. Nubia's location between northern Africa and southern Africa made it an ideal trading center. The Nubians served as go-betweens for traders. From the south, Nubians imported or brought in items such as leopard skins, ostrich eggs, feathers, ivory, ebony, spices, and gold. They then exported or sent out these same items to the north. The items were in great demand by the Egyptians and the early peoples of southwestern Asia. So Nubia's location was good because they were right in between two civilizations. So they would trade with the people to the north of them, and were able to trade with the people to the south of them. So there's a lot of commerce going on, a lot of trade and buying and selling, which can enrich the Nubians. Okay, continuing in your text. The Egyptians particularly valued Nubian gold, which the Nubians not only mined but also purified. The Egyptians used it lavishly to construct statues and decorations. As Nubian trade flourished, so did the Nubian economy. The control of the gold trade served to make Nubia rich and its neighbors jealous. At first, Egypt and Nubia traded peacefully for raw materials. Then, at some point, the Egyptians realized that they could gain greater wealth if they controlled Nubia's trade routes. By 2600 BC, Egyptian monarchs had claimed all the trade routes in northern Nubia. The Egyptians also began looting Nubia's rich natural resources. They cut and hauled away blocks of stone, such as granite, which they used for statues and buildings. They also mined Nubian copper and gold. In about 2000 BC, the Egyptian king began to annex or add on the land of northern Nubia. First, he conquered the region. Then, he ordered mud brick forts built near the second cataract to protect the newly annexed land. By annexing northern Nubia, the Egyptians gained Nubian resources and Nubian soldiers. So Nubia began getting wealthy. The Egyptians saw this and they thought, why are we trading with them and making them wealthy? Why don't we just take over their area, take over their land? Then we won't have to buy their gold. We'll just mine it ourselves. All right. Thanks for watching. You can continue on your social studies in your Google Classroom.